Superb. Next up, Jacob Roberts, Senior Policy and Strategy Consultant with Cenex, who's going to talk to us about equipping organisations to enable local EV adoption, EV electric vehicles. Jacob.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this wonderful event. I have really been enjoying the first session, which had nothing to do with transport, which is my area of expertise. But my background was in geography and environmental management, and so this entire event is something that's very close to my heart. Today, I want to talk to you about what Cenex is doing to equip organizations to help enable local EV adoption. Before I begin, there we go. A quick introduction to Cenex for those that aren't familiar with us as an organization. We're a not-for-profit sustainable transport consultancy that were founded by government in 2005. In the years since, we've privatized, keeping our non-profit status, but now work with public and private sector organizations to help reduce harmful emissions from transport. And this involves electric vehicles, involves electric vehicle charging infrastructure, involves battery storage, renewable energy, involves changing driver behaviors and fleet patterns and duty cycles. You name it, we look at it. So why am I talking to you about local electric vehicle adoption? A lot of these slides I'm going to gloss through very, very quickly because they are, if the beeper works, there we go. They are completely covered already within this session. So we need to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degree limit. That target is, well, our progress towards it is going very well, I hear. Surface transport in the UK, many of you will be aware, is actually the worst performing sector within the UK for CO2 emissions. And that's not because the emissions from transport are going up, it's because the emissions from everything else are going down, whilst transport has stayed more or less at a flat line. But the thing that's maybe not been covered quite so much is the impact of air pollution. And in the UK, we estimate that poor air quality causes roughly 36,000 deaths per year, which is pretty scary. And it's also pretty scary that only one of those deaths has actually been officially attributed towards poor air quality, which I think is on the verge of scandalous. What's happened more recently is we've started seeing net zero becoming quite a partisan topic. And in the context of transport and the work that my colleagues and I do at Cenex, it really comes down to recently one major political party that are trying to row back on their commitments to phase out the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles, and another political party basically saying, well, we're going to ignore that and put it back to how it was before. But whilst all this politics is going on, actually sales of electric vehicles have remained really strong. From 22 to 2023, sales of electric vehicles increased roughly 20%. And also, whilst this has been going on, we have a government that publicly is saying one thing and in private are actually introducing regulations that on a global scale are fairly ambitious that will phase out petrol and diesel vehicles by 2035 and also mean that 80% of all new cars and vans will be electric or zero emission by 2030. This is the UK government's single biggest carbon reducing policy. So the fact that it didn't fall by the wayside entirely is something that I think a few people within industry are reasonably happy about. But this all lends itself to the argument of why EV adoption is important. To enable this, we need infrastructure, we need places to charge the vehicles, and it's fair to say that the frustration with EV charging infrastructure, rightly or wrongly, is growing. Every day there's another article about how electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging isn't quite meeting the needs or expectations of consumers. The value of electric vehicle charging infrastructure really depends on how much it's used, though. So for us to invest and improve EV charging infrastructure networks, we really need to make sure that infrastructure is being used. However, to do this, we're asking local policymakers and organisations to take a bit of a step into the unknown. We're asking them to move into a different area. We're asking fleet managers who traditionally work with petrol and diesel to start basically gaining an understanding of energy networks and the electricity grid, which is not something that was in their original job description. And for a lot of decision makers, this is a real leap of faith and it actually prevents action. Small organisations, large organisations, it can frequently prevent action. So what I really want to talk to you about today is how equipping those organisations with the right data and insights can help unblock some of those decisions and actually enable electric vehicle adoption at a local level. So first, I'm going to talk briefly about what Cenex is doing to equip local authorities to enable local EV infrastructure network development. Local authorities have a really vital role in the transition to electric vehicles. I think those that work in the industry tend to say they have almost the most pivotal role in the transition to electric vehicles. And that's because they really are the gatekeepers of the ideal land and locations, and also the knowledge and insights on consumer behaviour that can enable EV charging infrastructure networks to develop at a local level. If you don't have access to a driveway or garage, really, you're looking at your local authority to provide infrastructure for you to transition to an electric vehicle. Some local authorities moved very quickly. My career in the electric vehicle industry began at Coventry City Council, and I'm absolutely not going to take credit for Coventry City Council recently being named as the best place in the UK to own an EV. Absolutely nothing to do with me at all. You can quote me on that. Don't tell Shamala, who is my successor, who did most of the hard work, I have to admit. Other local authorities, as you can see from this map from EVA England, have taken comparatively little action. What we're trying to do is provide evidence and insight to help local authorities to build strategies to implement electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We're doing this through a platform that we refer to as NEVIS, National EV Insight and Support Service. It was for a time actually managed by a colleague of mine whose name was Ben, and so it was anecdotally referred to as Ben's Nevis, but unfortunately he's now moved on from Cenex, so it's just gone back to being Nevis. This service, if you are a local authority, of any local authority in the UK, if you're a local government officer, this is free for you to access. You can go to nevis.cenex.co.uk and sign in with your local government email address, and you'll be able to access everything I'm about to present to you. As a disclaimer, we can also arrange access to other organisations for a small fee. So one part of NEVIS is what we call the Insights Toolkit, and this is really providing the data, forecasts, and the kind of quantitative basis to take action to deliver local EV infrastructure networks. To give you an example of some of the insights that are made available through this platform, we can provide local authorities with an understanding of what the current status is, so how many EVs and electric vehicle charge points are installed within their local authority area at present. But we can also take projections based on the ZEV mandate policy and give local authorities an understanding of how many electric vehicles could be on the road up to 2040, up to 2050. And that then provides them a basis to invest in infrastructure, and we can also provide projections to help them understand the required number of electric charge points, whether that be a smaller number of rapid charge points or a larger number of slower charge points. As we like to say, it's about putting the right infrastructure in the right place at the right time and basing that on the needs of the user, and that's something that these tools are intended to help local authorities to plan. We also have mapping and spatial insights from various different sources. In essence, I won't go through these each in detail, but in essence, this is about giving local authorities the tools to identify where the infrastructure is likely to be most needed in the short term, medium term, and long term, which traditionally has been a very, very interesting reason why local authorities have just not acted, because they don't know where to begin when it comes to locations for EV charging infrastructure. We've made available a knowledge repository, which in the simplest terms is basically Wikipedia for EVs and EV charging, albeit not anyone could edit it, because can you imagine? I wouldn't want to make... actually, I haven't looked at the electric vehicle article on Wikipedia, but I assume there's some interesting things written on there by people who are less than favourable towards electric vehicles. We also make template procurement documents available. Local authorities need to procure electric vehicle charging infrastructure network operators, and without this kind of intervention, every local authority will design their own procurement documents, waste loads of time doing it, and then industry, in responding to those tenders, will have to take a different approach to every local authority. So we're trying to standardise that for the benefit of both local authorities and industry. And last but not least, working in partnership with our friends and colleagues at Energy Saving Trust, some of whom are in the room, and they have a stand in the foyer. We're also delivering networking services and roadshows to local authorities. And the really heartening thing about this is actually within these groups, questions are asked by local authorities, questions and issues raised, and almost always they are addressed by other local authorities. So just by bringing people together, we're actually having a positive effect. And then really, between Cenex and Energy Saving Trust, we're there to fill in the gaps where there really is no existing best practice or advice. So a lot of this is just done through networking. So local authorities, really important stakeholders, and we're hoping that we equip them with the data insights to enable EV infrastructure installations at a local level. But that's nothing if nobody is going to use the infrastructure. So I'll briefly, in the last part of this presentation, talk about local businesses and the role that they have in transitioning to electric vehicles. So businesses have a really vital role. People that don't work in the transport sector don't often realize that the majority of new vehicles sold in the UK go straight into companies. They don't go to private businesses, they go into companies. And this is exactly the case with electric vehicles. At the moment, the majority of battery electric vehicles on the road in the UK are registered to companies, not to individuals. And so that means they are key to delivering the transition to electric vehicles. However, the internal expertise, as I've mentioned earlier, fleet managers are not energy managers. Energy managers are not fleet managers. There's something of a disconnect which can often break down progress within particularly smaller local fleets. And to address this, we have for a long time now, I think back since maybe 2007, 2008, have offered fleet and infrastructure reviews to local authorities, which cover the operational suitability of electric vehicles, the infrastructure requirements, and build a total cost of ownership-based business case. And that looks not just at electric vehicles, but all different technologies. Because at this point in time, if we're being completely pragmatic and honest, electric vehicles don't work for everybody. They don't work for every vehicle type. We don't want to try and put a square shape into a round hole. We want to make sure that we're producing advice that businesses can act upon. This process, broadly speaking, goes through a process of baselining the fleet, so look at their existing fleet and how it's operated, and then looking at the electric vehicle or alternative fuel solutions that would be suitable for those uses, and then estimating the cost and emissions through the life cycle and total cost of the vehicles. To give you an idea of the outputs and how they're used, we're assessing the fleet operation, so we're looking at daily mileage, we look at the emissions of the fleet, and then we can target electric vehicles and sustainable technologies at the areas where the emissions are highest. And we also look at the amount of infrastructure required to meet the needs of that fleet, and this is all borne down into a total cost of ownership calculation, which really makes the case for investment, which is going to apply whether a fleet has 3 vehicles or 300 vehicles. It all boils down to the business case. So companies are procuring the majority of new electric vehicles in the UK. Enabling them to adopt electric vehicles is really key to accelerating local electric vehicle adoption. We're delivering services to local fleets to help them remove some of those barriers and understand the vehicles better, and we hope that that is going to enable fleets to procure and use electric vehicles sooner. But that requires them to have electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So what we're getting at here is really the two things are interlinked. We're equipping local authorities to deliver local EV charging infrastructure, but that's only going to be worthwhile if the infrastructure is going to be used, which is why we also, alongside this, need to be equipping local businesses with insights that will enable them to procure and use electric vehicles in their local area. And that, in turn, relies on the provision of infrastructure. So we need it on both sides, and that's why we're making the insights available to deliver this. I have no idea whether I managed to rifle through that in 10 minutes, but if I did, even I'm quite surprised. Okay, thank you very much.